Hello, I'm Howell, and this is Snack Time. Snack Time, I'm not sure if I'm going to keep the name, but it's going to be a series where I want to discuss and digest ideas that aren't concrete. This is a thinking space and a place where I'm going to organize my theory crafting thoughts and text into text and videos. I think this will be a good space to talk about cool stuff that I'm not like 100% sure about. But I think a lot of stuff has a lot of merit, and it might even just be fun to talk about. So we'll see. Today's title is What Overwatch Contenders May Offer as Insight into Future Metas. Today's snack is there is a place. Is there a place to run comps such as Angry Titans Ash Goats, as seen on Rialto in the losers finals of the Atlantic Showdown, where Angry Titans on defense of Rialto A replace the Diva in Goats 3-3 with Ash. Um, so that's where we're gonna end up. I want to talk about a few things first, and we'll see what we can talk about here. So I've got a few ideas on my notes here. We're gonna run through it. So again, what discussing aren't facts. These are based on theories that I have and history. Um, So yeah, think of these things as trends. Um, Not just in Overwatch, but in a lot of esports in general. So tier two teams and players, which in Overwatch is contenders, tend to push a game's meta further than tier one's players. Tier one players, teams, and whatever tend to stick to the most optimal play, um, because they're the best at it. They are so good at it that it it doesn't really pay off to play off meta, which is how a meta develops, in short. And this happens all the time in League of Legends, in FGC games, and tons of other games. Pretty much every competitive esport game has a meta. Um, this is usually because the tier one players are the best, like I said, in the most complete sense. So playing goats was invented in contenders, but it was mastered by the tier one players that eventually got their hands on it and started practicing it. And the minutia and the attention to detail and things like ultimate tracking and comboing were really fleshed out by the tier one pros after they got their hands on it. That's what makes them the best. That's how metas form, like I said. Um, so it's not that it's kind of hard to say, but it's not that players in the tier one are like the best at everything and that they can't be challenged by tier two players at and teams at times, or that they're absolutely better. But I really like the term that they are the most complete. I think that makes sense. So that's how they become tier one and can push the meta. Um, 3-3, for example, emerged in contenders trials from a team called Goats, which we know, that was destroying everyone in bracket that they faced. And now, usually, meta developments like this are not as dominant as Goats has been. They come in many shapes and forms, such as niche picks or strategies. One that comes to mind were the Meta Athena strategies back in the Apex series tournaments hosted by OGN in 2016 and 2017, where not Saya player, he was on that team. Libero used May to build up onto platforms that were otherwise unreachable. Um, so they did this on Dorado to set up certain defenses, for example. And a more recent example that probably a lot more people will remember was in Owl, where Treehouse is what it's called, which was Anubis Point A, where you would prop the Orisa up onto that highest high ground, and then you could have the shield for your Widowmaker. It was often accompanied by Junkrat that could um, displace dive onto the treehouse, like Winston's and Genji's. Um, and then also it allowed the Widowmaker to contest pretty much every sightline, including, very importantly, the archway that the attackers have, where they will always set up their Widowmaker up there. Um, Recently, we've seen other developments of things like the Symmetra portals, being able to put Rio J Hong's Ana up there. So they come in many different ways. It's not always like a team comp. Goats is actually like meta. it is the meta strategy and team comp. But these developments are usually much smaller. So I want to make that clear. It's not that the tier 2 scene is always developing the strategy to use. It's definitely not true. Most of the time, I would say 9 out of 10 times not true. It's usually pushed and developed in tier 1 in that sense. However, there are these nuances that really come out of the tier 2 scene, and I think that's really important to look at. Um, so another reason why tier 2 teams often find out new metas and strategies or push the current meta is because they often play on the newer patches, the more recent patches, which are either on live servers or closer to it. So, there was the Goats Killer patch, and we didn't see it in Overwatch League at first, but it happened in Contenders, and everyone was still playing Goats. And like, oh, did not kill Goats. Goats is still here. So it kind of gives us those insights. And that's kind of, I think we hear this narrative where the Paris Eternal were scrimming Angry Titans, and this was before the Overwatch League started, and apparently they were just getting stomped. Angry Titans, the Contenders team, the tier 2 team, was beating them all the time. That's, I mean, it is concerning, but it's not that far fetched. It's very reasonable because in Contenders, Goats was really being played from Contenders season 2 of 2018. We're talking summer. But like when Runaway won in Korea, they won with Goats, and that was in July. I want to say maybe it was June, one of the J months. I'm pretty sure. So these teams had been playing Goats for much longer, and then of course you look at now the best team in Overwatch League is the Shock and Titans. Well, Titans had been playing this mode forever, so of course they're amazing at it. But teams like New York Excelsior are also phenomenal at Goats, and San Francisco Shock, and they didn't play it in Contenders, so a few of their players did. But beside the point. Sorry. Okay. So we can see two examples. One was the Vancouver Titans, who had been playing Goats and had developed their strategies and their synergies for a long time. They did make some changes, as I've talked about in previous videos, but then we also have the Shock, which is a great example, and the New York Excelsior, great examples of how Goats wasn't developed in Tier 1, it was developed in Tier 2, but those teams pushed it really far. And while I do think there are some Contenders teams that could give them a real run for their money, I think that 90 to 95% of cases, the top three, four, including Gladiators from Owl, would destroy most tier 2 teams just because of that completeness we were talking about. They're just overall better players, a lot more experience in general in the competitive scene, a lot more rigorous schedules of playing, and they also have LAN experience, which is really important. But that's kind of beside the point. So, and I guess I should add the another reason that tier 1 doesn't play on the live servers that contenders do is usually competitive integrity. You don't want to release a patch where there are drastic changes and then tell teams, hey, you have a week to learn this and then play it because it could drastically shift the meta, and that's just not cool. Um, so I want to make a brief divergence to talk about a guy who goes by the name of Axe, who is a Super Smash Bros. Melee player. He's been in the game for like 13-ish years. I know for sure he's been at least competitively active for 11 years because of a thread on Smashboards that's talking about some of his combo videos. Um, so he's been around for a really long time, and the whole time he's mained Pikachu, which is a character that's considered mid tier and has been considered mid tier pretty much forever. And so when you think about a fighting game, there's a roster of characters, and then they love tier lists. This is their version of meta, basically. is a tier list with an S level character is just better and more complete than an A character or a B tier character. So that's you can think of it as like the meta essentially. Um, I wouldn't exactly call it the meta. I don't think that term translates perfectly because there are gameplay metas and strategy metas and map pick metas. But it's a pretty decent analogy if you're not familiar with fighting games. So last Sunday, Axe won Smash Summit 8 on the 16th of June, which was Pikachu's first major win ever. And the thing about Axe is he's been in this top 20-ish ranked player area for a long time. He's been in this bubble where he's even been like around the top 10, like super close. And this is a game that has historically had five gods that were basically unbeatable. And then other players such as like Leffen, um, and others. So just like a very solid top tier of players. So then being in that top like 10 to 20 areas is super difficult. Um, and he's also got some really solid secondaries or non-main characters, like someone you would pick maybe to counter, or if say one character struggles because it's comboed very easily by another character, maybe you'd switch to a character that can be campier and use projectiles, that kind of thing. So I don't want to get too much into it because this it's not the point of the video, but um, he does have really good secondaries, and his secondaries, his best secondary is Falco, who is a top tier, like top four character in the game, and he just chooses to play Pikachu instead, and he is basically the Pikachu main. There are other Pikachu players, but he's definitely considered the best and like by far, and he's basically developed most of the meta by himself. Um, I've got a few asterisks on that one, but just take it at face value for now. There's you can look into it if you'd like, but basically, he's the only main high level Pikachu. He pretty much has to figure out all the new tech by himself. Um, so for example, one thing about Pikachu is that I'm talking about developing the meta of Pikachu. He has a lot of nuance to his skill set. For example, multiple hitboxes on his attacks. So in Super Smash Bros. Melee, there are aerial attacks, and his up aerial is kind of like a flip. So it has multiple different hitboxes. There's a hitbox on his main body, and there's a Pikachu has his tail, his Thunderbolt tail, that spins around in the air with him, and that creates like a weak hitting arc above him. Um, so the body hitbox, for example, gently spikes opponents outward and downward. So if you're on a flat stage like this, let me see if I can do this in a mirrored webcam. You'll kind of get hit like it's like a slight arc and then it's downward. So he hits you generally off the stage, and characters with weak recoveries can be edge guarded from that, causing them to die. Um, and the tail hitbox, which you can intentionally get by spacing the character properly, can be used to juggle and extend combos, um, and get more percentage up on them to kill them afterwards, or to eventually, ideally, use either an edge guarding technique or a finishing move that will just kill them outright. Um, and Pikachu even has what's called an air wobble, which is kind of like it's on the stage Final Destination, which is it's basically an infinite juggle on certain characters. Meaning, if he gets this grab up throw and he can juggle you till you die. It's not on every character, but it's on some, and it's on this one stage. And these are just examples of things that this player Axe, has developed over time with this character that no one's really been pushing besides him. And the reason I want to say that, like, I'm bringing him up because a mid-tier character in Super Smash Bros. Melee is kind of the equivalent of like the tier 2 scene in a lot of major esports, where it's like it's not that he himself as a player is tier 2 because he's definitely amazing, but he is restricted by what the character is capable of. He's restricted by the meta. However, over time, the meta has changed and now things are looking different. Um, So why I'm bringing this up is he's always been a guy who accepted being a second tier player. He stayed loyal to his character, and now he's destroying the best players. Like I said, the gods like Mango, Hungry Box, um, Leffen, the God Slayer, and finally Wizrobe, who is another fantastic player, always hovering in this top 10 player area, who recently won the latest Super Major Smash tournament, Smash and Splash, just 2 weeks ago. So he's pushing the meta of Melee beyond where we could have ever imagined it, even a few years ago. In Axe's hands, Pikachu looks perfectly viable. It looks so fast, so good. And even for Pikachu, a character who has been considered mid tier for this whole time, to be considered even a low high tier, that's an insane paradigm shift in a game that's been out since 2001 with no patches. Think about that. After all this time, he's maybe going to be put from mid tier into top tier because one player really pushed him. That's kind of where I'm going with all this. So, obviously, this example doesn't relate perfectly to Overwatch. There are patches, new maps are introduced, new heroes are introduced, etc. Um, but it's an important narrative to consider examining tier 2 Overwatch. So, players like Defran and Mangachu who pocket pick Torbjorn, like they can push and develop niche strategies for their teams that simply cannot be mirrored, at least at that level, by opponents. And then there are players such as Libero and Rascal, who are both extremely versatile players and can be used to execute strategies that, while maybe are not optimal, maybe not like strictly meta, they're incredibly difficult to face and adapt to in real time. Kind of like we saw from the Chengdu Hunters this whole season. And Cruz from the Paris Eternal, for example, commented specifically after their match against the Chengdu Hunters, where they were being spawn camped on Blizzard World Point A. They just couldn't even leave the first point. And he was mentioning it. It's not that they can't beat that. It's just that it's really hard to adapt in game in the moment when you only have 4 minutes and people are getting frustrated and your set strategies aren't working. Like 4 minutes is very little time. So that's the importance of these strategies. It can be disruptive. It can be, I mean, it's generally cheese. We know that term. It's thought of as cheese. But if cheese wins games, we take those. So, considering all these thoughts, I want to bring up the case I found watching the Atlantic Showdown of Contenders 2019 season, particularly Map 4 of the losers finals match between Envy and Angry Titans, where Angry Titans used that Ash Goats on point A defensive Rialto. Let me move some stuff around real quick. Let me bring up the VOD actually. So make this a little quieter. So I'm gonna play this out, but let's look at the situation really quickly. So we can see this is just the start of the map. Envy's on offense, and Angry Titans are on defense. And like I said, the main key is this Ash is replacing the Diva. And over here we have standard goats. The three, here's the third one, and then the three supports. So let me just say the situation. What we're gonna watch is Emil on Ash is gonna get his ultimate Bob, and Crimzo is going to counter it with Trance. And it's not an intended counter, it actually just happens at pretty much the exact same time. So let's watch this a bit.
So Envy moved up on the high ground. We can see that the payload is right here at that corner where it's really hard to push past on point A, and right before you get into the really open. So here we can see just the general health bars. I mean, even let's rewind it a bit to watch a bit of this. Watch the health bars on Envious. It's like we've got two below half HP tanks. The third one, Zarya, is almost basically at half HP. And there's no damage coming through over here that's really sticking. And that's kind of the idea of having a DPS here. People used to try McCree goats, which was then countered by Moira goats because of the sustain. So it's not like a new idea, but I think the difference is the ultimate that Ash has, the Bob versus like a Deadeye, for example. And I'll get into that in a bit. Let's just play this out a little bit more. Okay, so we see that Envy had to retreat back into this building. They have to reset, get all their cooldowns back, like armor pack, projected and self barrier, the Lucio amp. And so we're going to see a quick reset here. And now here we see that Crimzo is about at alt, and so is Emil. They're both going to get it very soon. And here we see the just on the approach alone, Elevode's half HP, Jaru's a little low, and Sharp is getting burned down at the time. And what's really important to remember is usually you want to funnel all of your support cooldowns, such as the armor pack and the Zarya bubbles, onto the Reinhardt for maximum value and tankiness. But if you have to use it on a diva, it's not the worst thing. She has Matrix and stuff, but well, let's just watch how this plays out. Basically, if you have multiple people that are low too, it's really hard to determine who you're going to put that on. Because, like, putting it on a diva is not the worst thing, but if you lose your Zarya, you like no damage and the fight's pretty much lost. So here goes Bob. The trans came out at the same time. And the thing with Bob is in a point like Rialto A that's very open, he can be a team winning ultimate alone. It's just the poke, the damage. I mean, he can actually kill pretty quick if you're in the wrong spot. But then ultimately, it will displace the opponent team. So you're talking, you throw out Bob, and then you have people are trying to run behind corners, break line of sight because the theory is that he works like a Torbjorn turret, which is he will target the first thing he sees, and he will only stop targeting that once LOS is broken, and that doesn't include like a Rhine shield. So you actually have to break the line of sight to get him on a different target, which can be really frustrating and really detrimental to a team facing Bob. Um, so there's a very real argument to be made that you have to use Transcendence or Sound Barrier to counter Bob in a point like this, um, much like a Diva Bomb, right? So we think about what does that mean? What is the reaction? Okay, does that mean that does that open up Spectral for a free Graviton Surge now that Crimzo has used his trance? And now he used the trance to save Sharp. Really, it wasn't exactly a counter. But looking at the ultimates, they would have either had to completely back off from Bob and disengage and maybe lose a few people on the other end. Angry Titans would get some alt charge on the retreat, or they would have to use this trance to counter him. So basically, it worked out.
But yeah, so we have to ask ourselves the questions like, is that going to open up Spectral for a free grav, aka like an uncounterable graviton surge? Well, not necessarily because
Fire is getting up to his sound barrier,
and if he gets that can realistically counter a grav too.
it's not as good as trance because sound barrier is it's better in some senses, but overall we have to say that trance is better against the graviton surge because the sound barrier is capped at 800 overshield that just depletes, whereas transcendence is 300 healing per second. So say that spectral grabs, and then it is countered by Fire's sound barrier. Well, then, does that open up Lulzish for a free uncounterable shatter, or perhaps um, I lost my train of thought.
But yeah, so you have to think about that. And in that sense, it's like, okay, obviously it's not free. The shatter can just be blocked by Reinhardt barriers, the Brig shield. It could be interrupted by the Brig shield bash. It can be booped and displaced or delayed and interrupted so that the proper reaction can take place. So no, it doesn't. But if there is a big shatter that normally would have been reacted by Fire's sound barrier, then yes, that sound barrier was then used on the graviton surge, and now you get the value out of that. So so it really comes down to how Envy conversely uses their Diva Bomb and Rhine Shatter, because I mean obviously if the shoe's on the other foot and stand one gets a really critical shatter, or Elevote uses his Diva self destruct to get out the support alts on Angry Titans, then yeah, I mean the point is either moot or the tables are turned at that point. So it's kind of like this rock paper scissors thing. Uh, Essentially, Diva self destruct and Bob really function the same. Like ideally, you want them to kill outright, but a strong mispositioning or an isolating of a certain character could be just as potent in a lot of ways. But it is really, I think it comes down to this rock paper scissors and preference. So there are a lot of pros and cons to having both Diva or Ashe, just as replacing Diva with Sombra has pros and cons. Yeah, with Sombra, you have the EMP, which is basically a fight winner. You have hacks, which can pick enemy supports. You also lose the D Matrix, which is super important, and you lose tankiness, which is also super important on the front line. Um, and Diva is also one of the best characters in the neutral for like in a different sense assassinating supports, but I mean we see Note do it all the time. Just because of her movement and her burst damage with the micro missiles. Um, so yeah, like Shanghai Dragons, they found success with the goats, the Sombra goats, and meanwhile Vancouver Titans have struggled with Sombra, for example, because their best Sombra player on Vancouver is Twilight, who has to be on the Zenyatta or Ana in this composition, which puts Soman Su on Sombra. I mean, maybe they could try Stitch on the Sombra. He's more used to that role. Soman Su is a phenomenal Zarya. He used to be a Doomfist main. Um, so maybe they can try putting Stitch in instead. But then that also limits them to using Sombra goats and switching back to the main Zarya goats and Diva goats is then they're limited by having Stitch, who is a good Zarya but not as good as Somansu. So there's so much rock paper scissors that goes into it. Um, and then there's the Houston Outlaws who they found success with it using Dante, who is I will say the best Sombra in the league, and even the Sombra Doomfist composition, some people call Hackfist, that was really innovated by Element Mystic with Sparkle, and just phenomenal Doomfist play. So to conclude, there is no right or wrong answer. It's all just theory crafting, like I said. Um, Goats is obviously insanely oppressive in terms of staying power, which is why it's been so dominant. However, like Monte Cristo alluded to in stage two, towards the Outlaws, if teams continue to play Goats against other teams that are obviously far superior at Goats, such as Shock and Titans, how will they ever win? And how will a new meta ever form that benefits them? So Shanghai Dragons were one of the first teams to break the mold. Wouldn't say they're the first, but they were one of the first teams that broke the goats mold to Sombra goats and really stuck with it. And other teams are following suit. We have New York Excelsior using Sabiel B with the Sombra goats as well. So really the takeaway I want from this video, for me personally, and maybe for you guys as well, if you feel this way, is that the meta of a game is important, but it is not law.
teams should abide to the meta with caution, but they shouldn't be afraid to view it with a few grains of skeptic salt. Just like in any profession, there's really no best way of doing things. Um, it's very often that there are two or three optimal ways of doing things, just like a shot in basketball, for example. And finding a team color and identity may prove both to provide confidence to players and also a lot of fun. So maybe you lose still this week, but you had a lot more fun and the atmosphere in scrims is just better. And then maybe that translates into better team synergy and comms, and you win in the future weeks when the strategy is more developed. So yeah, I really think that teams should be more willing to push this, and that's really it. This is kind of just a conversation about metas, breaking out of goats, and really importantly, the importance of having a tier two scene and how they can offer insights like this and just possibilities. I by no means think that this Ash Goats composition is good. Oh, I shouldn't say good, but the best. It's not going to break the meta, but it's super cool that they're using it on Rialto A because I can see the potential. And if they're really comfortable doing this and they think that they can really eke those support alts out with Bob, it really could lead to an ultimate advantage. So I think it's really something that people have to play with more. I think that those are good takeaways. Those are good reasons why Blizzard should put much more effort in supporting contenders much more heavily and Path to Pro in general. Um, Also, maybe it'll encourage you guys to watch more contenders and see some of these cool comps like Element Mystic out in Contenders Korea. There's all kinds of fun stuff all over. I mean, in NA, it's great. So we really should support the tier two scene and see what kind of fun they have for us. That'll be it. So yeah, I don't know. Leave a comment, like the video, dislike it if it was too long and boring. Let me know what you think. Let me know what I should talk about in the future. If you have any ideas for me to discuss, I'd be super open to hearing it. So yeah, thank you guys.